I'm thrilled to have this illustrious panel with me today while we talk about what happens after investment. And what we decided to do is talk a little bit about the background, getting ready to be invested, making sure you're finding the right people that you actually want to partner with. You know, the joke I like to say is it's easier to have a divorce, to get rid of a spouse, than it is an investor. So going into this relationship is a really big decision. So what we want to do is start with having each of our panel members spend a minute giving a little background on their experience. We'll go into their businesses and their investment histories after this. We're going to spend the first part of the panel talking about preparing for investment, preparing for finding the right people, understanding what you may be looking for. And then the second half of the panel will be focused on, all right, now you have investors. How do you manage that relationship? How do you make sure that the expectations are being worked on and that you can count on them for guidance, but there really is a true partnership there and how to make the best of that. It's not just about the money, it's about the extra things that they bring, the value added. So why don't we start on the end? Please share a little bit of your background and the perspective you're bringing to our panel today.
My background, interesting. 20 years serial entrepreneur, have incubated and exited 5 ventures. I'm an investor around 32 startups globally, most of them in the Bay Area. I'm from the Bay Area. And I'm a philanthropist on the other end, where I invest in women-owned ventures. My sweet spot right now, this year, most investments are IoT infrastructure, a lot of enterprise mobility. My expertise is mobility and enterprise, the culmination of both. What am I looking at to invest right now in the current year is more on the infrastructure side, more on this entire focus of getting software devolved back into hardware, where Internet of Things becomes bigger, and not only does it become bigger, but the wraparounds mobility kind of devolve themselves into compute and power in the hardware space. So what was the other part of your question? Sorry, I'm kind of...
I just wanted you to give a little bit of background about the perspective you're bringing to the table. So as an investor and an entrepreneur, which is fabulous.
So my perspective is very entrepreneur driven. My investment philosophy forever has been that you could be investing in an idea that's been done 100 times before, but if the entrepreneur is right, then you better go and invest with the entrepreneur. And entrepreneur as the main fulcrum of an investment methodology is what my perspective is.
That's perfect, and I'm sure we're going to discuss being able to identify those superstars like Reuben. Reuben had a wonderful piece in TechCrunch last week. So can you give us a little bit of background on what you've been doing for the last few years, and then we can start talking about the business a little later. Cool?
Sure. Yeah. Been programming for over 15 years and designing for pretty close to that, and always been passionate about technology. Launched multiple ventures. Nothing as big and as scalable as we are doing now. As Susan mentioned, we've just closed another round of $1 million to continue to scale the company we're doing in education technology, which basically focuses on increasing engagement at university and college campuses.
Thank you. Dr. Naik, can you give us a little bit of background on what you've been doing for decades in creating businesses and investing?
Sure. I've been in Tampa area for the last 30 years, and I'm a doctor, primary doctor. So I started buying practices and grow my business, and a time came when I exited about 3.5 years ago. And now I'm trying to invest in small startup, and I meet a lot of people at TiE here and also TiE Silicon Valley. My investment experience has been fairly good, and out of 20 or so startup I invested so far, only one has failed. It failed within 6 months, but not bad. So far my track record has been good. Regarding my business, is a doctor. I don't see many doctors here except few some of them are entrepreneurs, so I don't know teach them how to do it. But if you have any questions between the session, go ahead and ask me.
And we're really excited to have the co-founder of Molekule here. Give us a little background.
Okay, I'm obviously not Jaya Rao. She was coming from San Francisco. Unfortunately, there's no nonstop flight between San Francisco and Tampa, and so the flight left late from there, and she missed her connection in Houston. So I'm sitting in her place. I am more known for my inventions and developments in solar energy all around the world. But this molecule is also my invention. This came out of a personal necessity. My son is asthmatic and has a lot of allergies, and I kept looking around for something that I could do to help him. I looked around in the market. There was nothing in terms of getting rid of the triggers in the air. And that's when I thought that a solar technology that I had just developed and shown at an Air Force base, which was on CNN headline news, that maybe that is the technology that will help. And so the rest is history, and that product is coming on the market.
We're so glad you could be here. So we're going to start with Meera. Meera, could you give us a couple of minute overview on the different types of stages of funding and angel versus VC, just to kind of give us the foundation for the background of our conversation?
Lovely, thanks for that. So I think when an entrepreneur starts the entire process of looking at funding, they normally have an idea. So I get entrepreneurs at different stages. I get entrepreneurs who are thinking of an idea or thinking of 5 ideas, and they want to validate which one would be the more primary one. I get a lot of entrepreneurs who come and say, we have 5 ideas we want to take you through, and we want to fund all 5, or we want to fund one. So for those, I think validation of the idea is the most important aspect, whether it's an MVP-driven validation or it's just a presentation or a customer validation. My advice at that stage is to really get out in front of customers and bring a certain customer validation before you approach an angel or an investor. A lot of companies, the culture differs from place to place, but this is how typically it would happen in Silicon Valley, is that you'd approach the angel networks first, because that's easier money. Angels don't do the kind of due diligence that VCs would end up doing, or the PEs would end up doing. So you'd go to angels and you present your idea. You have to basically choose where you're going, depending on what group or what angel has a history of not only investing in the types of what your idea is, that industry, but also the stage. So there will be angels that are or VCs that are very comfortable with investing in a seed or pre-seed. And then the definition of seed has moved on to be a Series A now, or angels that go late stage or go in a certain direction. Also, investor kinds vary in terms of, there are investors that want a quick exit, so they'll look at late stage, something that will get bought out in a couple of years or 3 years maximum. And there are investors that wouldn't even invest in a company that's kind of trying to go to Mars and bring minerals back to Earth. So these are viable business ideas that are available in the market. So I think from an investor perspective, the most important aspect is to really choose where you're going, so that you don't really wasting time talking to people that might not add value to your venture, or value to your venture now, or have the inclination to support the idea that you're trying to disrupt.
One of the big challenges is seeing so many entrepreneurs just thinking that when they meet a rich guy, that's a potential investor, and really not going into the level of detail they need to understand not only is that person going to be a value added with their money and network potentially, but with their experience, and will their name being associated add something. So Reuben, could you talk a little bit about doing that level of research and finding the right players to be your partners through investment? If you want to give us a little bit of background on the business and then go into this group of how you pick these investors to partner with, that'd be great.
Sure. I'm going to make this a little easier. Cool. So Check Here, like I mentioned, provides engagement software for universities and colleges. What that means is that we focus on simplifying all the processes that student affairs staff and students do every day for everything that's extra and co-curricular on campus. So events, activities, programs, places, everything outside of the classroom that students can participate in to learn complementative skills to what they will learn in the classroom. These are soft core skills: leadership, creativity, communication, collaboration, those types of things. And we have a way to collect exactly what they're doing in real time, analyze that data, correlate it with every demographic point the institution has on them, line it up with other structured data, and provide this back in a way that's very simple and easy to understand how it correlates with higher education retention and a bunch of other factors. A little bit of history, we launched back in May of 2014. We raised a very small, under 100 case, like basically pre-seed round that let myself and a couple others go full time. Since then, we've brought on 84 universities and colleges in 30 different states and 3 different countries, nearly 500,000 students using the software, and just closed a round of $1 million with a few notable investors, including Jeffrey Vinnick, Ronald Schlosser, who was the former executive chairman and CEO of McGraw-Hill Education, current board member, and 500 startups, similar to Y Combinator or Techstars, if you haven't heard of them in the Valley. The goal was to not only get a large amount of funding to basically pour more gas on the fire, but to find people that were subject matter experts in what we were doing, could make connections that we need to, understood the business, and could help it bring us to basically the next level, and get us to some other revenue streams that we have in mind. So Ron is probably the top person from a strategic alignment that we have. He's got every connection, knows everyone, understands the whole market, and gives us some great insight. Not only, for someone like that, he was a large chunk of the round, but I was much more interested in him than I was the cash there. Versus someone like Vinnick, obviously has connections, but is, obviously focused in very many other things. So he complemented, what Ron was doing with another sizable portion of the round. 500 Startups brings the technology aspect. So, working with thousands of companies around the country and world, and one of the most extensive networks there is, I can call them and anyone in the world will pick up a phone when they call. So that was another win that's like, I don't really care how much they're gonna put in. The connection and being part of that family is really important. So, and then, knowing your investors, right? So those were the 3 notable. There's a bunch of others in the round, and especially in the seed round. The idea is, they're doing due diligence on you, but the relationship goes both ways. And I think for a lot of first-time founders or people that haven't raised money, it's a risky thing, it's intimidating, you can be nervous going through it, and you're kind of just trying to prove yourself. And sometimes you gotta flip it and think about who you're working with, and it's sometimes all about that money, and it's like, if I can get the money, I can do what I wanna do. But in reality, you're entering, Susan mentioned, into what might be a tighter relationship than a marriage with some of these people, and it's much harder to get out of, and you're giving up a portion of your company, and even though it might not be a lot in some instances, it can play a pretty big role in how much time and resources go into keeping those people up to date and working with those people and disagreeing with those people. So I tend to do just as much due diligence as I would expect them to do of them, looking at past companies they've invested in, understanding what their intentions are, getting on the same page, and putting as much of that in writing as possible.
Even sometimes interviewing other investments they've made, those entrepreneurs, really getting to know what that kind of involvement will be. So that was a great answer. Thanks.
Absolutely, sure.
So with Molekule, as you're getting investment, as you're looking for those strategic partners, sometimes you meet fantastic people on paper, and then it just doesn't gel well all the time. So what's the best case scenario for the kind of people that you've been bringing on as board members, as investors, as strategic partners, to really make sure that your brand is going for that big disruptive technology you guys have built?
Okay, before I answer that question, I have a 1-minute video which will put my answers in context. I think that's important to see. If you could put that on, please.
Fresh air is a beautiful thing. And when it's perfect, we notice. But we spend 90% of our time indoors, where air can be 5 times more polluted. It's not just pollen, pet dander, and dust, but it's microscopic pollutants like mold, gaseous chemicals, bacteria, and viruses that cause us the most harm. These pollutants get trapped indoors, where they accumulate, concentrate, and multiply. Current air filters try to catch pollutants, but can't eliminate them. It's time for a new approach. Introducing Molekule, the world's first molecular air purifier. Molekule doesn't capture pollutants, it destroys them. As air passes through Molekule, light excites a nano-coated filter, where pollutants are deconstructed at a molecular level, turning them into harmless elements that are supposed to be in the air. Surround yourself with the air you were meant to breathe.
That background, as you heard before, what kind of investors you're looking for. Obviously, you want investors that bring strategic value to what you're doing. And there are many types of startups. Ours is a hardware startup. And when people looked at it, and they said, well, okay, this is just air conditioning, which has been there for decades. And so most people would not be interested. Or if they're interested, they may not give you that value that you're looking for. So we were looking for investors that would bring that strategic value. And one of the best, and the first one we found, for example, I'm wearing this Fitbit. So this investor was the first seed investor in Fitbit. He was the first seed investor in Dropcam, and a number of other devices that are very successful on the market. So for one thing, they had many other investments that would become our strategic partners, so that was very important for us. Number two, they have deep pockets. And so this is the kind of startup that you can't do with just $1 million investment, or even in the end, it may be as much as $100 million investment that you will have for the global market that it presents. So you want to make sure that that investor and the other network that the investor has that kind of value, or had that kind of capability to invest. So that's extremely important for us. Other than that, you want to make sure that they will be coming on board. They can recommend people that you would need. I heard before, for example, that you invest in the entrepreneurs. Now, it's not just the original entrepreneur, it's the whole team. And so what kind of team will it be? And that's what will make sure that this idea is going to be successful. So will they be able to recommend those people? So that was very important for us.
Perfect. It's really interesting to think about the very different types of investors who are out there who really at the end of the day want their money de-risked as possible. Reuben having so much traction really de-risked a lot of that because he already was able to show massive adoption, and not just for the schools to want to adopt it, but also for the users, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how many schools it's in if the kids aren't using it, right? With this, the fact that there's patents, the fact that you've already shown it to work, that those FDA clinical trial type approvals, it de-risks the product, but not always the execution piece. But in your case, I'm very confident the execution is going to be there. Dr. Naik, I would love for you to talk about with your own business as you scaled and grew to make it not only something that was investable but acquirable, creating all of those de-risking mechanisms along the way as far as systems and infrastructure. And then when you're looking at investments now in those entrepreneurs, how are you looking at the risk piece? How are you looking at them being able to de-risk as much as possible for you to be able to be comfortable with that investment?
Right. So it's like if you open one McDonald's, second one is a little tough, third one is easy, and the remaining 3,000 are a piece of cake. The same thing happened in medical field. I opened a small clinic in Clearwater, and then I kept on buying second one, third one. So once you know what the problems happen when you buy clinics, hire doctors, so you learn by making mistakes, and you learn it. Somehow, they ask me, how do you pay X amount for this doctor's practice? There is no formula. I did not go to business school to learn all this ROI, return of investment, or whatever number they bring me. But then I got big enough and I had to say, let me take the money off the table. I was not ready to retire, but I sort of retired for a few months, and I decided, because I know in my mind that I cannot keep on doing this for long term. At a time you have help, I hired CEO and I hired vice president, network people, and the time came and I decided I have enough volume and revenues so that some private people, the company like Davita Healthcare Partner, which is public traded company, acquired me at good multiple, and that's how I de-risked at that time. But then I felt bad that why did I de-risk? I would have stayed for a longer time. It's a seller's remorse rather than buyer's remorse. So after 3 months of vacation or retiring, I started doing something again. As I told Susan that I'm in Miami. I bought 4 clinics in Miami. I don't speak much Spanish, but I'm doing okay there.
Well, talk a little about the investments you've been making, because you've invested in over a dozen startups at this point. So what are you looking for, and what does that relationship look like? Because after that investment is made, you're involved, right?
Yeah. I think the one lesson I learned that when you invest, you need to be either in their board or advisory board. There are 4 local companies I invested. I am in their board. I don't give much help to them because they are very smart. That's why I invested. But going to the board, learning from them helped me a lot. I cannot, maybe I should disclose the names if you can. I can. So the first one, my friend Pat. Pat came and within 2 minutes, I had no due diligence on him. He just came to meet me in my office. I had a lot of money after my exit, so so Pat came. I liked him as a person. I don't know what he was doing, but because my wife used to go and pick up my kids, I rarely go to school to pick up my kids. So his company called Pick My Kids, and I liked him, and he said, I like the person. I had no due diligence on anything. I'm thinking I'm doing well with Pick My Kid. The second company, Priatech, the same thing. Milind, I met him in his warehouse. I liked the product he was doing, and I think his company is doing very well. Some other companies I invested, Anthony is here today, My Health Hero, they are doing well. So somebody asked me, do you do due diligence? Do you look at their numbers? I said, I don't. I look at people's eyes. I invest in people's eyes and people's heart. If they're good people, you will do well.
I couldn't agree more. So many entrepreneurs don't realize the importance of being likable, because when you're going into that relationship, it really is a long-term relationship. And if no matter how smart you are and how many patents you have or whatever, if people don't want to work with you every day, that is going to generate problems. So, Meera, going back to you, when you're thinking about the due diligence process, and I'm sure you're presented constantly with use of funds. Can you explain what use of funds are, and what does that actually look like in reality after that deal is closed? How often do people follow that to the letter?
Not a lot. It doesn't work like that. When you, especially when you're seeding and you work with entrepreneurs that have just gotten started on their ventures, by now I know that they're going to pivot so much, they're going to end up doing something that's quite different from what they started with, because the market information would come in, they'd work on more data points, they would get a lot more support from customers in telling them what they want to see. So mostly what you start with is not what they ultimately end up with in the long run. So when somebody presents a good idea, the whole process of due diligence basically, for me and as a team, even through Angels Forum, we talk to the customers that they are referencing, we talk to the team, we look at the entire team to see if they'll be able to go the next 6 months, because sometimes it only takes a month for them to just decide that they can't do it anymore. The third, a very important aspect is the involvement of the team at an earlier stage. How much of equity do each people have? What is the dependency of risk on each one of them to go through? Then we really like to see customers involved from the word go. We want to get some customer references. We want them to go talk to their customers. We want to go talk to their customers too, to really figure out if this is something people would pay for. And different business models work differently. There will be business models where they want to get paid for it, and there'll be business models where they don't want to get paid for it now, they just want to acquire customers. So looking at where they're going and the direction of the business model and how they will be able to pivot, these are basic processes that we follow. On an average, I see around 40 startups a week, and out of those 40 startups, basically go from 0 to 1 in a month. So that is that's the rate at which a normal investment at a seed level would happen. A is totally different. If you're coming in for a Series A, you're much more mature as an organization. They expect you to have traction, expect you to have revenue. So different aspects come into play at a due diligence at the Series A. But having said that, I think as an investor, a couple of things that always work well for me is when I understand what they're doing well so that I can add value to what they're doing. So that's very important. The second thing, indeed, is that they're coachable. The teams are coachable, and if you present an opportunity to them, they're not going to say, we thought about it, we don't want to listen. So that's the second aspect. And the most important aspect is that how clearly pivotable are they if the market turns, there's a war, or Trump becomes president tomorrow. What's going to happen to the startup? How are they going to proceed with conditions where they might not be able to sell into a certain country, or not being able to, if their hardware or their dependency on manufacturing is high, how are they going to manufacture in China tomorrow? So these are factors that always are at the back of every investor's head.
Perfect. So Reuben, you've gone through 2 rounds now. So how different was putting together your diligence materials and your use of funds for a seed versus a Series A with, much more sophisticated investors?
Sure. So I guess clarification on the round titles, which obviously don't matter too much, but my MP at 500 Startups says don't call this a Series A because I won't be able to raise a Series A if I call this a Series.
Apologize.
So
Your
that was
second seed.
Yeah, no. So yeah, and that's interesting, right? And that's the point. That's the reason I brought it up, is that it's very different on this coast, especially in Florida and even Tampa Bay, than it is the rest of the country. This is very much a seed round anywhere else, but on the East Coast and even up to New York, this is still a seed round. So. That obviously changes things depending on who you're raising from. Is very interesting. I would say the under 100K that we raised was harder than this round for $1 million. And most likely, obviously, because of traction and everything there. And there were other investors already in, but it took more due diligence for that round than this. And honestly, there wasn't much more that we did this time besides just show that the proof of what we were saying. I don't think I've ever shown more than 3 pages of a business model to an investor, and very much investing in the entrepreneur. Vinnick had said yes before he even knew what I was doing. So he had met me and said, whatever you want. So that's very much true in that, he knew me through other routes and was interested no matter what it was. 500 Startups was very similar. I've never met them. I had 2 30-minute phone calls and talked to them, emailed them some proof of what I was saying, and that was it. Ron was a little more diligent with McGraw-Hill and many of my other investors. Florida Funders, most of you may know, is an investor in the round as well. Obviously has more of a process and more due diligence there, but still nothing crazy. And that, when it gets to a certain point, legal fees start going up, and my resources and time start going up. So I'm very weary, and that's one of the first things I talk about is, listen, if we're going to do an investment here, how many hours of my time are you going to need to do this? Because I'm running a business. So yeah, it's not for even $1 million, at least for the investors I worked at, it wasn't too much. I was pretty happy with the process so far, and I'm not expecting to be able to say that ever again for another round I raise. So.
But I want you to spend another minute on
Sure.
this because, you run a data-driven company. And many companies do not have the data piece as the core of their business. We have a lot of companies who are service businesses or hardware businesses or others who it's kind of an afterthought because they're serving a customer. So can you spend a little bit of time on the level of data and clarity you have on customer engagement and some of the other things that make that kind of, here we've proven out the model, a little bit easier? Because I think that that'll really help other people. Hearing it was easy to raise your round, it's because you have real data. So explain.
Sure. Yeah, I also think a big difference is that we're making great revenue. And that to
That
me is
also helps.
Yeah.
When
so
you don't need it, it's super easy to
Sure.
raise money.
So to me, like that's the biggest data point,
Yeah.
more than anything, and that any company should be able to show. My assumption for something like Molekule is you have a lot of upfront costs before you can get to the point, and it's even just watching the video, it's obvious that you guys know what you're doing, and it looks great, and it's going to get there. So, but for us, it's if I can say, hey, we've sold 5 schools, and this is our revenue, and that recurs every year. And that's a great data point. But yeah, I mean, aside from that, like what's backing that, and what now most of the conversations, instead of sales, it's churn, it's customer retention, it's the different details. But yeah, because we're a data company, we're providing the data to the institutions. We have the same data and can show what that looks like, and show the engagement rates and the retention rates and everything. So yeah, I mean, I definitely would say it's a bonus. And the fact that we don't have to wait to get to revenue and have a bunch of upfront costs to get there is a big help.
Perfect.
Especially here.
It's a lot of places. There are many companies who do get early stage investment from locals, and because of the terms, it makes it a lot harder for them to raise from further along, more sophisticated investors, and we'll go back to that because I can tell you have something to say about that.
Not only investors, but co-founders also.
Oh, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
there's a lot of problems out there.
Really quick, I think there's a big difference between, why I keep bringing up here, between here and like the Valley, is that out there, their investment theory is to not miss a great company, while here it's to find the great companies. So you'll have people like Y Combinator and all these larger seed stage investors that'll make hundreds versus 12, if I heard that right, investments, right? And their job is, we don't care how much money we lose on the ones that we're missing, as long as we find the one that's going to make billions. Versus here, it's a very different.
So the business model is different for Y Combinator 500. The business model is to incubate, accelerate, right? Incubating, accelerating business model is a totally different business model. They don't care what happens when you're passed out of class.
Yes.
You got a stamp that you passed out of 2016 class of 500 startups. Then you're on your own. That's a tag you carry with you when you go and knock doors down. But is it going to get you money again? Probably not.
Well, it's spray and pray. And part of the challenge is many of those companies that go through that program, it's very much an economic development piece outside of the U.S. market. So it really depends. But back to Molekule, I want to spend a minute, Dr. Goswami, as you guys are developing this next stage, because how many years out are you to taking it to actual sale?
Well, this is interesting. We actually have already sold 2 batches. People who have pre-ordered, they know that they will not get their shipments until January. But the first batch that we released in June got sold out in 10 days.
Wow.
And this was all online. And then we were under a lot of pressure because people started writing saying that, oh, we were going to order, but now we see on the website sold out. And so it's because it's personal need of a lot of people. And so we had to release a second batch, which got sold out in 7 days. So now, at this point, we're not selling anymore until we actually deliver the product. But before delivering the product, now this is this is a startup where we have to manufacture a product. And initially, for example, the first year we may sell, say, 100,000 of these units. Next year, maybe we will be selling 1 million units. So we need to scale that up right in the beginning, that we want to have a manufacturer that can manufacture 1 million units and not be afraid to do that. So we've got our sales, and now we are trying to make sure that we deliver the product on time. We deliver the product that people are happy with. So for that matter, the first few units that have come back from the manufacturer, we have given to our investors to get feedback from them. The next about 50 units that will come next month will go to beta testers around the country so that we get feedback from them, making sure that everything is working the way it's supposed to work. And from then on, I think from end of November, we will give the go-ahead to the manufacturer and say, now you are in production.
And how do you manage your investor expectations? I'm sure you tell them in advance this is, 5-7 years before any kind of payback potential, right, or exit potential. So what does that look like? Because as you're starting to have this early traction and it's really exciting, I'm sure somebody in the background saying, oh, let's go to manufacturing earlier, so how's that looking?
Well, this is where it's very important to know your investors and have that relationship with them. That relationship between the investor and the entrepreneur is extremely important. And so we are always in close touch with them, and they know exactly where we are. If there is any problem, they are the first to know that we have this delay or we have this problem.
How were you able to find people who were really patient investors who are going to be there for you for the long term and possibly through several rounds? Do you have any tips on that?
Right. Well, see, this is interesting because in the U.S., most of the investments, especially in the West Coast, have gone into software type of businesses. And so they have forgotten how to invest in hardware type of products. And so for us to be able to get them, convert them to think, we had to, the first investor, as I said, the one who invested in Fitbit, his wife suffered from allergies. So when we went to meet with him, we took a unit with us. And we said, hey, it doesn't matter whether you invest or not, just take this unit home and see if it helps your wife. And 2 weeks later, he called and he said he's investing. Not only that, he said there's another venture group he has talked to, they want to invest also. And so from then on, we did not really have a problem.
I was just given the deadline, so I just want to end with Dr. Naik. So when you're looking at those companies to invest in, because you do get involved after you make the investment with them, can you give us advice as to how to make sure that we're being clear as entrepreneurs with an investor to make sure we're on the same page as to the level of involvement and how we can have the best possible relationship going forward? What advice would you give entrepreneurs?
Yeah, so if you find an investor who is interested, you should talk to the investor frequently, not every day, not every night, but at least every few weeks. And I don't expect them to make a major decision without at least talking to a lot of our investors. And as I told you, I'm not a very active investor in a certain way, but I do expect the company I invest in to be more responsible to my certain questions and how they conduct the business. And especially if I'm on the board or advisory board, I would like to learn what they are doing. So after investment, I do take active part if the investment is sizable. If it's a small amount of investment, I just get a letter once a year that your company is doing X, Y, Z.
So keeping the lines of communication open is the core.
That's correct.
Great. Thank you, guys. This was a wonderful panel. Really appreciate your advice, and thank you to TiECon. Thank you.
Good.